Celebration. Now, here's the thing. We have gone so far past God's design for Sabbath that it's hard for us to understand it. I think in a lot of ways, COVID actually did us so much more harm because a lot of our work became home and blurred the lines between work and home and work and rest, that it makes this even harder to take in and understand. So I want you to first to understand Sabbath better. You've got to understand right here in the scriptures, we're in Exodus 34, and you've got to understand the group of people to whom Sabbath is being given. What did they just come out of? What did the children of Israel just come out of? Bondage. Slavery. Do you think they got to rest in slavery? No. No, they did not. They did not know rest at all. Okay? God was giving Sabbath to a group of people who had been slaves for several generations, and all they knew was work. They had been driven day in and day out by taskmasters, calling them to produce faster, to produce more, to produce always. Sound familiar? Produce faster, produce more, produce always. Do you see how the spirit of Pharaoh has crept back into our society? The children of Israel had never known life without taskmasters. They had only known the heavy burden of one deity, Pharaoh. And his yoke was heavy, and his burden was overwhelming, producing anxiety at every turn. At Mount Sinai, God was calling his children to take off the yoke of one false god and put on the yoke of the one true God. They didn't know how that would look or feel because they had never experienced anything like that before. In fact, no one had ever experienced anything like this before. To have a God instead of a king that just pretends to be God. There were a lot of kings that pretended to be God, but they actually were taking on God as their king. That's how God originated it. That's how he wanted it to be. That's why he was so sad when the people of Israel later on asked for a king. It grieved his heart. It made him sad because he wanted to be their king. So the concept of Sabbath would be a major way in which the children of Israel were different from everybody around them, okay? So everybody else was not behaving that way, but God was calling his people one day a week to shut her down. My boss loves to say that. He loves it when he can go around to our offices and say, hey y'all, let's shut her down. Let's just shut her down. Y'all just go, let's shut her down. It's his favorite thing in the whole world. And God is calling his people one day a week to shut her down. From Friday evening to Saturday evening, to shut everything down and to rest and focus on him. The Sabbath was also a gift given to a weary people who had never experienced rest. Sabbath stands to this day as a gift for those who open their hearts and minds to accept it. I like to explain it this way. Now, we've talked about Mount Sinai was the place of a marriage ceremony, correct? So we had this marriage ceremony that happened on Mount Sinai between God and the children of Israel. Well, their wedding gift was the Sabbath. It was rest. It was the gift that God gave them on Mount Sinai during their marriage celebration. All right, so we are in verse 18 of Exodus 34. You must celebrate the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. The bread you eat must be made without yeast. What is that? What do we call it today? Passover. No, sourdough. Different bread. I thought sourdough does have yeast. Sourdough has yeast.
She don't know. She don't cook it.
Yeah, sourdough has yeast.
I don't use the yeast packet
It would
when I
be
make
flat
sourdough.
bread. It would be flat bread.
Flat bread, got
So
it.
it's just as I commanded you, celebrate this festival annually at the appointed time in early spring, in the month of Abib, for that is the anniversary of your departure from Egypt. Okay, so I love that in this new covenant that God was setting up for them, that He appointed times for them to celebrate. So He gave them this new covenant, and God builds celebration into the life of this new nation. I love that. They've been slaves, and now God was saying, you can celebrate. That was a completely new concept for them, I'm sure. Because we really don't know if the Israelites were allowed to celebrate after they became slaves in Egypt. We know that they worked hard. We know that they were driven by taskmasters. We know that life was so bad that it caused them to cry out to God, and He listened. None of that speaks to celebration, does it? But here God is saying to celebrate. How beautiful was it that God tells His children that He wants them to celebrate? We know, okay, remember at the Red Sea, God parts the Red Sea, they go across on dry land, and then Pharaoh's army goes in after them, and then they get on the other side, and Pharaoh's army is all drowned, okay? What happens just on the other side? What do? Can y'all remember? Miriam breaks forth into song. Moses' sister leads them in this spontaneous worship. We don't even know that they've ever heard this song before. She just breaks into song and she becomes a songwriter right there on the spot. And it's really cool because we see that actually happen in the Old Testament a lot, where people will just burst forth into this spontaneous songs. And we don't know, from what we know, they are songs that are written right there on the spot. And
I have a question.
Okay.
This has bothered me. I've
Okay.
looked it up, I've read about it, and I can't find the answer.
what?
This, and it shouldn't bother me. But I've read, and it's like, everything I've read is like they don't have a definite answer. Did Pharaoh go in with his people in the Red Sea?
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I wouldn't know that. I mean,
We don't have a historical record of a Pharaoh that was drowned, and I think we would know that. So I don't think he did, because Pharaoh typically didn't, he was at the end always.
Right.
He was never leading them. So, because,
I don't think he did either, but I don't know that for sure.
We know
of Pharaoh's army. It doesn't say
It doesn't say
being
Pharaoh in
his
his
army,
army. No, it says Pharaoh's army.
which makes me think.
but again,
And I know that's not important. but-
historically, we don't have evidence of a Pharaoh. This is why some people discount all of this, because we don't have any evidence of a Pharaoh that was drowned, we don't, yeah. So, but that's where faith comes in. So on the other side of the Red Sea, Miriam burst forth into song, and they celebrate what has just happened. And that was just a taste of what was to come. That was kind of like a prelude of what God wanted for them in the future. He wanted them to break forth in spontaneous celebration, but He also wanted to build into the nation of Israel these rhythms of celebration, okay? Okay, these celebrations weren't just times to throw big parties. Get that wrong, okay? They were built into the rhythms of the nation of Israel to encourage them to remember who they were, where they were, and who brought them here to this place. It was a way of remembering what God had done in the past so they could remember that forward into the future. Hi, come on in. You haven't missed much. In our desire to separate ourselves from the Jewish people, you know, we've tried to distinguish ourselves and pull ourselves out from the Jewish people, and in doing so, we've missed out on some of these celebrations. I mean, we know how to celebrate, but I'm telling you, they really know how to celebrate. If you've ever been to Israel and seen like a wedding or a bar mitzvah, I mean, they really know how to celebrate. But God's desire to see us celebrate Him and what He has done and what He continues to do has not changed. Okay, so I left out a verse, but it's in your I don't have it up here, I don't have a slide up here, but it's in your notes. It's Exodus 34:20b, and I love this. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Okay? Now this does speak of tithes and worship, tithes and offerings. Tithes and offerings. But it's so much more than that. So one thing I love is that built into the sacrificial system, I know nobody likes Leviticus, but Leviticus actually shows us how beautiful this thing that God created, the worship that He was creating for His people. It shows us how beautiful it really was. So Leviticus 5:7-11. But if you cannot afford to bring a sheep, which I don't think I would have been able to bring a sheep, you may bring to the Lord 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons as the penalty for your sin. One of the birds will be for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering. You must bring them to the priest, who will present the first bird as a sin offering. He will wring its neck, but without severing its head from the body. Then he will sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering against the sides of the altar, and the rest of the blood will be drained. This is an offering for sin. The priest will then prepare the second bird as a burnt offering, following all the procedures that have been prescribed. Through this process, the priest will purify you from your sin, making you right with the Lord, and you will be forgiven. If you cannot afford to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, you may bring 2 quarts of choice flour for your sin offering. Since it is an offering for your sin, you must not moisten it with olive oil or put any frankincense in it. I love that when He sets up the sacrificial system, He leaves no one out. You can't afford a sheep, bring a bird. Can't afford a bird, bring some grain. He gives everybody an opportunity to participate, and no one is left out. That is such a beautiful thing. It speaks to who God is. It speaks to who He is. He wants no one on the sidelines during worship. He wants everybody in there participating. They made a way for even the poorest among them to bring an offering. The mandate was clear. Participating in worship was not something to opt out of. Because of the way the sacrificial system was constructed, worship was not just something to observe. We have made worship something to observe now, especially these big mega churches that have the lights and the smoke and the fire and all the things, and it's become. I was telling somebody today, I think it was Will, I was talking to him about this, and I'm like, if you're at a place in worship and you cannot hear yourself sing, you're at a concert, you're not there to worship. If the music is so loud that it drowns you out, it is not worship, it is a concert. And we have forgotten that. Because we have not come to observe, we have come to participate. in the sacrificial system, you couldn't just come and say, here, bye. You had to stay and participate in it. In fact, a lot of times you would sit and have a meal with the priest. It was almost like what we're doing here, okay? It was a meal, and so you were not just on the side watching the priest do all the work. You were involved in it. It was active participation. The nation of Israel were commanded to come, participate, and bring something with them when they came. So if you can't bring a sheep, bring a bird. If you can't bring a bird, bring the grain. But you need to bring something with you when you came. The Hebrew word used for empty here carries with it the idea of coming before the Lord in vain. Remember how we talked about preparing? And the first week, we talked about preparing for worship and how there were a certain number of steps going up into the temple, and how they were long steps and then short steps, and long steps and short steps, and long steps and short steps. So you couldn't run up into the temple. You had to take your time to get up there. Why? To not come before the Lord in vain, so that you can prepare your hearts. It means here coming before the Lord haphazardly. God didn't want us to come in haphazardly. Worship was important in the life of the nation of Israel, and it wasn't supposed to be taken lightly. You know, I read an article today that said that megachurches are on their way out. And I was like, now we can do some work. Now God can move. Now God can work. Modern day worship has increasingly become a spectator sport rather than a celebration in which we actively participate. So also built into the sacrificial system was a call to bring our best before the Lord. If you read Leviticus 3:16, you'll laugh because it says that we should bring the fat to the Lord. I'm like, I can have all of that. But the Israelites were supposed to give God the choice parts of the sacrificial meat and bread. We weren't just supposed to give, that was the difference between Cain and Abel, right? Abel brought his best, Cain didn't. That was the whole thing. We're supposed to bring the choice things, the best parts. I believe the mandate is still the same. Are you bringing God your best? Are you coming to worship just to observe? Are you participating with God in worship and celebrating what He's done for you? The mandate is still the same. So God wants us to come before Him, with our hands full of tithes and offerings, full of expectations, full of passions, full of dreams, full of our desires, full of our burdens. He wants us to lay those things down at the altar. We're supposed to come in full, with our hands full, not empty. Worship gives us a chance to come with our hands full, but we shouldn't leave with those same things in our hands. Here, God, I'll give you a little bit, and we'll take the rest of it with me. That's not it. That's not what He's calling us to do. He wants us to leave it all. He wants us to come with our hands full, but leave with your hands empty and your hearts full. When we leave all the things that we carry into worship behind, it leaves our hands free to bring shalom to the world around us. Empty hands and full hearts are a powerful combination that God can use mightily in the world around us. So we go in with our hands full, come out with our hands empty and our hearts full, so that we can use our hands and feet in service to the Lord. When we bring all that we have and all that we are, then we get the opportunity to watch God use all of it for His glory. All right, now we're getting into Sabbath. I'm so excited. I was trying to rush through that part so I could get to part I really love to talk about. 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. Exodus 34:21. I love that he says it doesn't matter how busy you are. It doesn't matter the season, because we all have seasons that are busy, and if we're moms, that is all the time. It never stops. But God is saying, I don't care how busy you are, I'm commanding you to rest. It's a commandment. It's not a suggestion. We were built to rest. God built us to rest. So we are going to start talking about the Sabbath. The concept of Sabbath was instituted at creation. The precedent of resting because work was completed was established by God himself. So let's go back to Genesis. It's Genesis 2 through 3. Okay, so on the 7th day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. When I was in Old Testament, I loved my Old Testament professor. He's gone on to glory since. I say all the time, I can't wait to get to heaven, because I'm going to take a class with Dr. Barjan and Moses side by side teaching. It's going to be awesome. He was such a great Old Testament professor. And he, when he was teaching creation, he said creation was created in a hierarchy from least to greatest. Okay, so the things he created first were the least, and the last thing he created was the greatest. And he said, asked this room full of pastors, future pastors, some of them were current pastors, and so, what was the last thing he created? And all the boys said, men! And he went, nope, not even close. And then I was like, dang. And then one girl that was one of my sweet friends was sitting beside me, that she was way braver than me. She said, well, then it had to be woman, because we were created after men. And he went, not exactly, but you're getting closer. And he said, the last thing God created was Sabbath. The last thing he created was Sabbath. He instituted Sabbath as a gift at the very beginning. And it was the last thing he created, therefore, that made it the most important thing. And I was like, and it wasn't until I started, she came! Yay!
If they make it, I can make it.
Well, I'm so glad. Here you go. All right, so God created Sabbath right from the very beginning, okay? God blessed the Sabbath and blessed that day, set it apart. And when God blesses something, it's a big deal. So, it's something that should not be taken lightly. The Sabbath was a big deal. And if Dr. Barjan is right, and I believe he was, if it's the most important thing God created, that makes it an even bigger deal than we make it. We make it of it. The Sabbath is a day that is meant to be unique and distinct because it was set apart by God. We are commanded to work the other 6 days, but the 7th day should look completely different. All right. So, we're going to look at the word Shabbat. Okay? I've written it up here kind of sort of. My Hebrew lettering is not that good. But remember, you read Hebrew from this way to this way. So the first letter is here. Okay? This letter, this letter, this letter. So, and here they are. You see them. This, what does that kind of look like? A crown? What about a flame? Yeah, that's what it's the letter Sheen. Sheen. Right here. It's the letter Sheen. And Sheen represents a fire or a flame, okay? And then we have this letter here, got it over there. It's the letter Beit. And Beit represents the duality of the world. The present physical world, which is Olam Hazah, and the world to come, which is Olam Haba. The present world, Olam Hazah. The future world, Olam Haba. So we've got right now, and we've got the future, okay? And then the last letter is the Tav, right here. And Tav represents truth or life. When Shabbat is practiced the way it should be, it encompasses all three of the things represented in those letters. The word Shabbat doesn't just mean to rest. It means to cease work, to cease striving and straining. What did we talk about last week with idolatry? Don't be trapped. That the created gods, the fake gods, the Canaanites, they would strive and strain to try to get these gods to notice them. And God is saying, there's one day a week, I don't want you to strive at all. I want you to stop it all, and I want you to rest. It's completely revolutionary. Never been practiced before. Shabbat is a day of physical rest, but it's also a day of emotional and spiritual rejuvenation. Shabbat is also a taste of the world to come. We can experience rest here and now, but it's a celebration of a time to come when our work will cease. Everything will be done. It's our taste of paradise when we will finally find complete rest from the constant work of this world. Shabbat was designed to rejuvenate us and fan the flame of His Spirit within us. In fact, the word ruach, which means spirit, is also used for wind and sometimes for flame. That's why in Pentecost it appeared as a flame. It's all connected. So Shabbat is supposed to fan that flame, rejuvenate that flame that's in us, the flame of the Spirit of the Lord. Shabbat is also a time for us to acknowledge the truth of God as we cease our work so we can see His work. If we're still working, we can't see what He's doing. That's why Jesus called the distinction between Mary and Martha. Martha was in the kitchen running around. Martha was at His feet. It wasn't that Martha was doing wrong by working, but at that moment, He wanted Martha there at His feet also, so that she could see what God was doing right in front of her, instead of in the kitchen missing it all. Okay, that's why on Shabbat, women are not allowed to work. We're not allowed to be in the kitchen. We're not allowed to wash the dishes. We're not allowed to do any of that for 24 hours. I love Jewish Shabbat, because we don't ever get that opportunity, right? All right, so we're going to talk about a typical Jewish Sabbath, and I hope I can do this justice because I am not Jewish. It's only what I've learned in my research, okay? Typical Jewish Sabbath, it's marked by three qualities: rest, as we've talked about, holiness, and joy, okay? I remember reading a long time ago when I was little, there was a little house on the prairie, and they used to practice, on Sundays that they couldn't. It was kind of like their Shabbat on Sundays, and they weren't allowed to work, but there also wasn't a lot of joy. Like, the kids were supposed to sit still, and then, no, that's not what this is. There's supposed to be a lot of joy in the celebration of Shabbat. So, I love this. Do you know who lights the Shabbat candles? The woman. Always the eldest woman. So the woman always lights the Shabbat candles. It's always the eldest woman, and then she fans her hands over the flames and welcomes Shabbat in like a bride. It's all, I love the woman is always the one that lights the candles. There are two Shabbat candles, and they both represent something different. One represents Zakar. That's where we remember. We remember how God has worked in the past and recall his great works toward his people. And it is recalling the gift of Sabbath that was given to the Israelites in their deliverance out of the bondage of Pharaoh. So it's pointing back to Mount Sinai. And then the other candle is to Shamor, which means to guard or protect something. So we are to guard Sabbath as something special and unique that is a gift from the Lord. It is not something we have to do, but something God allows us to do in his kindness. Sabbath should not be a chore. It's a gift to be enjoyed. Then the eldest woman says a prayer for her family. They also pray a blessing over the lighted candles. They say, "Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, who sanctified us with the commandment of the lighting of the Shabbat candles." Now next, they move on to praying over the children, okay? For the males, they say, "May you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, like Ephraim and Manasseh. May you," and then for the girls, they say, "May you be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah." And then they pray Numbers 6, 24 through 26. How many of you have heard Carrie Job's The Blessing? "The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. Be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace." Now, one of our favorite Messianic worship leaders contacted Carrie Job and asked to record this in Hebrew. And my brother, before I got into any of all this stuff, said, he was at my house, said, "You need to listen to Joshua Aaron sing this in Hebrew." I'm like, "What? I don't know Hebrew." He said, "Just sit down and listen." And he made me sit down, and halfway through, I was sobbing. And I'm like, why am I crying? Well, I've heard this song a million times. But there's something about hearing it in the language that it was given to, this blessing was given to Moses and Aaron to use as a priestly blessing throughout generations. And when you hear it in Hebrew, you can almost hear them in the darkest times, when they're in exile, when they're waiting for the Messiah, when they're all the ways that they had to wait and all the ways they were hurt, and to hear, you can almost hear them singing this in their in the original language that it was given. And for me, I remember I was watching a documentary about the Holocaust. And they were interviewing a survivor who was a child at the time. And she said when they were, they got off the trains and they were standing in line and they were all so scared and they didn't know what to do, the kids all started singing in Hebrew the blessings that they knew. And I'm like, I can almost hear this in the darkness of a concentration camp when they've lost everything and all they have to hold on to is the promises that God gave them. So I'm gonna end tonight by singing that in the original language. I'm not gonna do it right now. So, next, they move to the wine. Now, we are Baptists, so we're not gonna do that. But we are, can y'all come help me do this?
What do you need?
Just hand it out.
Oh, hand it out, I knew that. I thought she was gonna make me pour it, and I was like, it'll be all over the table.
No, I'm not making pour it. It might be all over the table when I'm done with it. I should have done this ahead of time, but I did not. Do these elements kind of remind y'all of something? How are we doing on two? How many more do I need to pour?
I think that's good.
Is that it?
I'm gonna pour this
You got it, Lori. I think that's, I got all three of them one. Because you
Everybody's-
don't have one.
All right. So then they pray over the wine or grape juice. This is grape juice. If you're watching from seminary, it's grape juice. I'm not leading them to drink wine. Please don't come take my diploma. Blessed are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. I'll drink it. That's good. Now, they also do a washing of the hands, which I'm going to go do before I touch the bread. I don't want to pass anything down to y'all. I love that they have a hand washing ceremony because it's proof that God wants to keep us healthy. God knew what germs were before we knew what germs were. That's why He had them wash their hands. Now, they did not have challah bread. I'm so sorry, so I had to do the next thing, which was this. So, here we go. I thought we were going to do this right. I just wish they would have had the challah bread. I'm so upset.
What kind of were you looking for?
Challah bread.
Hello?
Challah. It's C-H-A-L-L-A-H.
Whatever that is. What's the difference between that and this?
This is brioche. It has butter in it, which you probably shouldn't.
Oh.
Because you can't mix dairy and something. I forgot. All right. So, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth. Which reminds you of anything? Exactly. We didn't invent communion. We just continued it in a different direction. Jesus recreated the Passover meal, the Sabbath meal, and turned it into a celebration of what He was going to do. He didn't take it away. He just recreated it, because that's what He did.
I think we should use this bread instead of the little.
I do dry
too.
cracker.
I agree. This is good bread.
That's very good bread.
Well, the challah bread is good too. It's really good. It's really moist. And I just hated they didn't have it. I was so upset. All right. So, you see all those things there? And I got 2 loaves. Because to represent God's provision in the desert when He gave us a double portion of the manna in the desert. on Saturday evening or Friday evening, he would give them a double portion so that Saturday they wouldn't have to go out and work and get more stuff. That he gave them a double portion. That's why they did 2 loaves. Now I want to go back to this. The Eshet Chayil. The eldest male says or sings the Eshet Chayil. Do y'all know what that is? That is Proverbs 31. Part of Proverbs 31. I know we kind of all have a love-hate relationship as women with Proverbs 31, but here Proverbs 31 is being used by the men to pray over the women in their family. They pray over them. And the other thing that I want to point out, several things. I could do a whole thing just on Proverbs 31 because when you look at it from the Jewish perspective, it's much different. First of all, it's in the book of Proverbs, so who wrote Proverbs 31? Who wrote the book of Proverbs? Solomon. So Solomon, that's King David's son, right? Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. So, in the Jewish scriptures, in the Jewish Bible, after the book of Proverbs, they always put the book of Ruth. There is historical evidence that Solomon wrote that as a praise and a memorial of his grandmother, grandmother, Ruth. Proverbs 31 is pulled out here to point to a pinnacle of Jewish womanhood. This is what Jewish womanhood should look like at its highest, at its most perfect. Ruth was the one that Solomon was writing about. Was Ruth a Jew? No, she was a Moabite. So the pinnacle of Jewish womanhood was not even a Jew. She was a Moabite. And it just shows the beauty of what God had planned. He never intended for it to just be about the Jewish people. He intended for it to be about all people. So I just love that it speaks to that. And the other thing is, the words used here, Eshet Chayil, I think it's Chayil. Yeah, it's Chayil, refers to not really, we call it a woman of virtue. Really, more times than not, this word is used to talk about a warrior. Someone who is a warrior. So basically, Solomon was saying he was writing this for a warrior woman because that's how he viewed great-great-grandma Ruth, was that she was a warrior woman. That she came, she left her family, she came to a land that was not her own, where she was hated. She got out in the fields and she worked so that they would have food to eat. She was a warrior woman. So Proverbs 31 is not about us being, this perfect woman. It's about us being a warrior woman. That we can go to war for our families. I love that. So but here on Sabbath, it's always used as a prayer to pray over the women in the family. Shabbat is not a time of complete silence and sitting still. It is a time to be enjoyed with family and community. They gather around the table and share several meals, all prepared in advance to avoid work. So the women you have to prepare for Shabbat, so that when Shabbat hits and the candles are lit, that no other work is done. So all the food is prepared in advance. That's why it's things like hummus and they have roast chicken already prepared in advance, or salads, or whatever the things they have, it's all prepared in advance. And they also have a time of worship and celebration as a community at the synagogue. Shabbat lasts from Friday when the sun goes down, when the first star appears in the sky on Friday evening, that's the beginning of Shabbat, until the stars appear in the sky on Saturday evening. Sabbath, however, is not about pointless traditions and boxes that need to be checked. Sabbath isn't a work for us to perform, but a gift for us to receive. And remember, Sabbath is ceasing from our work so that we can see God's work, okay? So, in the time of Jesus, Sabbath had become boxes to be checked. You know, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that, don't carry your mat on the Sabbath, don't do this on the Sabbath. They had invented these laws around the Sabbath. Remember I said they were so scared of committing idolatry when they came back from exile that they took the law of God and they built rules around that law so that they wouldn't break the law. And then they built rules around those rules so they wouldn't break the rules, so they wouldn't break the law. I mean, they literally put this bubble around the Sabbath so it became like harsh instead of a gift. God does not want Sabbath to be harsh, to be extra work. He wants it to be a gift. So, what is, I love this, Christy McClellan talks about this. What is God's work? What is God's work? Christy McClellan says, God is always making all things new. He's always restoring. He's always healing. He's always restoring people and making all things new inside of them. Sabbath is a celebration of restoration. What has God done to restore your life? The answer to this question should guide our celebration of the Sabbath. What has God done to restore your life? What has He done to restore you? And that should guide our celebration. The message of the Bible is not, do this. The message of the Bible is that it's already done. The rest we crave, the rest we need is not found in our work, but in God's work. We rest. I love this. Don't miss this. We rest because we trust in a God who has everything under His control and His authority. Let me say that again. We rest because we trust in a God who has everything under His authority and His control. That's why we can rest. That's why we don't get another job and work all the way through the weekend too. Even if we need the money. Now this, Dave Ramsey, he would probably come and smack me if I said this, because that's not how he views this, because he views it from a financial perspective. But God says, no, don't work yourself to death. I created you to rest. Trust me. Trust me. This is something that has guided me, because I could use a second job. But it would probably put me in an even earlier grave if I did that. That's why I have to just trust Him. Sabbath is about restoring the diminished. It's about replenishing the drained. It's about repairing the broken. That's from Tim Keller. I love that. Let me say that again. Sabbath is about restoring the diminished. It's about replenishing the drained. It's about repairing the broken. I love Tim Keller. Miss him. Okay, now, when I was doing Christy McClellan's class, I had learned about this, and I kept thinking, I need to tell her about this because she may not know about this. And I didn't. I kept it to myself. I'm sorry about that. So I'll have to ask her forgiveness one day. But it's called the Sabbath Pen. This story is from Dr. Seth Postel. If y'all ever watched One for Israel, if you haven't watched One for Israel, I suggest you watch it. It has some of the most beautiful testimonies of Jewish believers, Arabic believers coming to faith in Christ, and how God leads them to that point and what he does to lead them to that point. But Dr. Seth Postel is one of the people who speak and teach on One for Israel. He also teaches at a Messianic university in Israel, in Jerusalem. So they're there in the midst of all of this. But Dr. Seth Postel, he was raised in that area, but he was raised Jewish. He's the one I told y'all earlier, the only time he ever heard the name Jesus in his house was as a curse word. And so he had no idea really who he was until he met him. So he tells this story when he was in the Jewish military, because everybody, men and women, have to take their time and serve in the Jewish military, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And he was doing that. He was in training. It was his training camp to learn all the things he needed to learn. So he was talking about when he was learning how they teach you how to take apart a gun and put it back together, take it apart, put it back together as quickly. I mean, they do it over and over and over and over and over again so they can do it as quickly as possible. And when he was learning this, everybody kept saying, don't lose your Sabbath pen. And he was like, what are you talking about? What is a Sabbath pen? What are you talking about? Well, apparently it's a pen. It's a tiny little pen that sits near the firing chamber of the gun. And without the pen, the gun is rendered useless. You can't use it for anything other than to smack somebody with it. I guess it wouldn't be completely useless, but it wouldn't be able to fire. It wouldn't be able to carry out the thing that it was created to do, which is to fire bullets. So without that little pen, so apparently if you lost that pen when you were taking it apart, put it back together, take it apart, put it back together, if you lost that pen, it got you into trouble and you ended up losing your weekend pass off the base, which is why they called it the Sabbath pen, because you would lose your Sabbath. You wouldn't get to go spend that with your family off the base. So they called it the Sabbath pen. I was like, oh my goodness, that will preach, is what that'll do. That'll preach. Because the Sabbath is just like that little pen. Celebrating Sabbath in our lives can act as a pen to hold us together and determine our usefulness in the world. Without the Sabbath, without that time of ceasing our work to remember God's word, without that time of restoration and repair for our weary souls, we will find ourselves less useful for the kingdom. It is a pin that holds us together and that helps us in our usefulness in the world. Sabbath binds us to our purpose in the world. It is a time of rest that leads us to shalom, and that shalom can be carried into to the people in the world around us. It does build shalom. I mentioned this last week. We have done this in our house 2 or 3 times. I know 2 for sure. I think it may have been 3, where we practiced our version of a Jewish Sabbath. And I can remember the first time I told the kids, they were young, they were pretty young, and I told them several weeks in advance what we were doing. We're going to practice a Sabbath. So I said on Friday evening, you guys are going to hand in all your devices, you're going to do all these things, and we're going to spend time as a family. We're going to focus on the Lord, and like I said, we're going to focus on the Lord, spend time as a family. And I remember the day of, I was trying to get everything prepared because I was making food that I knew they would eat, that I didn't have to cook throughout the weekend. I was getting everything ready, and I was thinking, this is going to be bad. my kids are going to mute me and tie me to a chair and take back all their devices, and it's going to be awful. I thought it was going to be terrible. He's not even listening. So Friday evening, when the sun set, I said, okay guys, it's time. You need to turn in all your devices. I had a basket. They ran and got all their stuff and they put it in. I was like,
Whoa.
miracle number one. They didn't even argue. I mean, they put all their stuff in, and we spent the evening, we watched The Chosen. It was really funny because they, Ema. Okay, that's what it is. They kept asking me, Mama, why are these women named Ema? I said, oh, no, baby. Ema is a mom, is a mother. So you're my Ema. Yes, I'm your Ema. So for like 24 hours, I was Ema. And I was like, this is the cutest thing ever. I love this. But we watched The Chosen, and we went to bed that night, and the next morning, we watched shows a little bit more, and they said, can we go play board games? I'm like, absolutely, go play board games. That's fun. That's fine. And so I heard them back in their room, no video games and nothing, having the best time. And by the evening, there was a peace. There was a shalom in our family that I had not experienced maybe ever in our household, because I mean, it's one mom and 4 kids, and I am terribly outnumbered, and sometimes it's crazy. But there was a peace. And instead of them saying, can we never do this again, as soon as we lit what was, I hate that I couldn't bring the Havdalah candle. It's what they light at the end of Shabbat. I hate that I couldn't bring it because it's really cool, but it got melted when I was moving, and I haven't ordered another one. But when we lit that candle, my littlest said, when can we do this again? I'm like, wow, that's a testimony right there. And so I'm telling y'all, if there's ever a time when you can do this, you don't have to be strict about it, but if you can even do an evening where you do this, or even like a 12-hour period where you do this, I promise you will find a shalom that will fall over your home that you will be utterly amazed at. Because we in the Western world and our churches, Sundays are just as busy as every other day, aren't they? They are. Because we have pulled out of those Jewish celebration times. We have distanced ourselves from that, and in doing so, I believe we have hurt ourselves. And also, it's not just that, it's the modern era in which we live. We'll talk more about that later. We're going to talk about Jesus and Sabbath right now. This is really good. So, for so long, I thought that Jesus, when he healed on the Sabbath, was just his way of thumbing his nose and at the establishment of the day to kind of rile up the priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and make them all mad. I really thought that was the purpose. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with that. So Jesus consistently healed on the Sabbath. Christy McClellan, if you ask her, she said, if I could spend a day with Jesus, it would it'd go back in time. If I had a time machine, I could go back in time and spend one day with Jesus, it would be on the Sabbath. I want to see Jesus on the Sabbath as he heals. So he healed people on the Sabbath. It was one of the reasons why the Pharisees and the Sadducees got so mad at it. Okay? You see it. I know some people don't like The Chosen because they do deviate from Scripture sometimes, and they add stuff in, but there's some really neat things that I've enjoyed watching. And one of the things is watching the Pharisees and how they get upset. Jesus has just healed somebody. They've seen a restoration happen, and the priests and the Pharisees get mad. But he's changed a life, and the Pharisees are mad at him about it. So, remember what Christian McClellan said, God's work is always making all things new, right? If that's God's work, Jesus was God, of course he was going to heal on the Sabbath, okay? If God's work is to always be making all things new, then Jesus had the same innate desire. He healed on the Sabbath because it was part of his character. He healed because he was God and because he was doing the work of God. Remember I said the Sabbath is to restore, to repair, to replenish. If that's the purpose of Sabbath, then when Jesus was healing on the Sabbath, he was actually honoring the Sabbath the way it was supposed to be honored. So in the New Testament, Jesus calls his disciples to find rest in a new way. And I'm going to read that for y'all. It's Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." In the beginning, I talked about how the Israelites at Mount Sinai, God was calling them to take off the burden, the yoke of the Pharaoh who claimed to be God, and put on the yoke of the one true God. Well, this is the same thing. Jesus is calling his disciples to put on his yoke, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Jesus is calling his weary followers to take off the yoke of this world and to put on his yoke. The yoke of this world, just like the yoke of Pharaoh, is heavy. It's burdensome. It's never ceasing. Jesus is telling us that we are going to be yoked to something. You are going to be yoked to something. That's just fact. You're going to be yoked to something. So we can be yoked to the world, or we can be yoked to Jesus. The world will never help us carry the load. The world adds to the load. It weighs us down. Jesus calls us to take on his yoke, because when we are yoked to Jesus, he carries that load for us. And that is where we find rest. Here Jesus is saying that he is the Sabbath, and that every day we can experience the Sabbath because he alone can give us the rest we need. It's not about our work, it's about the work of Jesus. So, what are you yoked to? It's a question I want you to ask yourself this week. What are you yoked to? Is the thing that you're yoked to helping to carry your load, or adding more to it? If it's anything other than Jesus, it is not carrying the weight you are. And we're going to talk about the spirit of Pharaoh. When I was researching, I was teaching this, not when I was researching the book, but when I was researching, preparing the Bible study and preparing to teach this, I read part of a book by a man named Walter Brueggemann. And the book is called Sabbath as Resistance. And it was really good, but something he said in that book has stuck with me. I want to talk a little bit about that. So he compares our modern day rat race that calls us to produce more, to produce faster, to produce better, to produce more often. Sound familiar? Didn't I say that the Pharaoh did the same thing to the children of Israel? He made them produce more, produce faster, produce better, produce more often. He compares our modern day rat race to the same spirit that drove Pharaoh to enslave the Israelites and force them to work tirelessly without rest. Y'all, the spirit of Pharaoh is still alive and well in our world today. And I believe that COVID drove it into overdrive because, like I said, offices shut and we brought our work home. And then the lines really blurred. They were already blurred, but they blurred even more because of COVID. The spirit of Pharaoh. That's what it was. Even though we are not technically slaves to Pharaoh, we still participate in the same system that drove the Israelites to cry out to God for deliverance. I mean, literally Pharaoh coming down on them so hard and putting the burden on them so heavy is what made them cry out to God to send a deliverer. And we are experiencing the same thing today. We are increasingly finding ourselves yoked to the system of this world when we are being beckoned by Christ to live differently. In the modern rat race, our choice to practice Sabbath is seen as radical resistance to the revived spirit of Pharaoh. So when we draw boundaries around our family and say, no, this is family time, this is rest time, we're not doing anything, we're gonna put boundaries around certain days or certain times, then we are practicing a radical resistance to the spirit, to this revived spirit of Pharaoh. It gives new meaning to the call of Joshua in Joshua 24:15. Choose today who you will serve. Will you serve the system of Pharaoh and yoke yourself to the world? Or will you serve God and yoke yourself to Jesus? And the choice is ultimately ours about what we're going to do. And that's all I got for you guys.